The rusted tunnel door crashed shut behind her, sealing Rachel Donovan in total darkness with the sharp click of metal locks and the restless pacing of two starving attack dogs somewhere in the black. From the other side of the bars, Warden Silas Crow stood listening, certain that fear would do what handcuffs could not. He expected panic. He expected screams. What he didn't understand was that the woman he had thrown into that underground cage wasn't helpless, and she wasn't alone for long. She was a former Navy SEAL who would face death in darker places, and before the night was over, the dogs he meant to use as weapons would be standing at her side. 3 hours earlier, before the rusted tunnel door and the hungry dogs waiting in the dark, Rachel Donovan had been driving alone beneath the white Nevada sun. Her faded 1996 Chevrolet Blazer rattled along Highway 317, carrying a thin coat of desert dust and more memories than luggage. Rachel was 36, tall and powerfully built, with broad shoulders shaped by years of swimming, climbing, and carrying wounded men through hostile terrain. Her dark brown hair touched her shoulders, but was tied back at the base of her neck, revealing a narrow scar beneath her left ear and another near her collarbone. Gray eyes watched the empty highway with the constant awareness of someone who never completely relaxed. 6 years earlier, Rachel had served as a Navy SEAL, attached to a classified maritime rescue unit. She had left the service after an operation in Yemen ended with the death of her closest teammate, Luke Harper. Since then, she had become quieter and more guarded, especially around strangers. Yet beneath the discipline and controlled expression remained a fierce instinct to protect anyone being mistreated. On the passenger seat rested a rectangular walnut case. Inside it was the American flag that had covered Luke's coffin. Rachel was taking it to his mother. Margaret Harper lived outside Silver Rock, nearly 40 miles beyond the county line. She was a 68-year-old widow with silver hair, a slender frame, and the patient manners of a retired elementary school teacher. Since her son's death, Margaret had written Rachel a letter every Christmas. She never blamed Rachel for surviving, but Rachel had blamed herself enough for both of them. Delivering the flag was not a military obligation. It was a promise she had postponed for far too long. The radio lost its signal as she turned onto an older mining road marked by a leaning wooden sign. Heat shimmered across the asphalt. Abandoned conveyor towers stood in the distance like black skeletons. Then Rachel saw the prison transport van. It sat crooked across one lane with steam rising from its open hood. 2 uniformed guards stood beside it while 5 prisoners remained chained inside behind reinforced mesh. One guard waved angrily at the engine. The other had dragged a young inmate onto the gravel shoulder. Rachel slowed. The prisoner looked about 23, thin and underfed with curly black hair matted against his forehead. His tan prison uniform was torn at one knee, and blood ran from the corner of his mouth. Despite his exhaustion, his dark eyes remained alert. His name, printed on a fabric strip above his chest, read C. Brooks. The guard holding him was Vernon Pike, a thick-waisted man in his late 40s with a shaved head and a sun-reddened face. He carried himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to hurting people who could not fight back. A second guard, younger and nervous, stood near the van but kept looking away. "Get back inside!" Pike shouted. The prisoner tried to rise. Pike struck him across the ribs with a collapsible baton. Rachel pulled over. Her dashboard camera continued recording as she stepped from the Blazer. "Vehicle trouble?" she called. Pike turned sharply. "County business! Keep moving!" Rachel approached at a measured pace. She wore worn jeans, desert boots, and a pale gray t-shirt beneath an open canvas overshirt. Nothing about her clothing announced her military history, but the calm precision in her movements made the younger guard stare. "That man needs medical attention," Rachel said. "He fell." "I watched you hit him." Pike's face hardened. "You didn't see anything." Rachel's phone rested in her shirt pocket with the camera activated. She angled her body so the lens captured Pike, the wounded inmate, and the prison van. The prisoner lifted his head. For 1 second, his eyes met hers. "Copper Ridge," he whispered. Pike heard him. He grabbed the young man by the collar and shoved him against the side of the van. A cloud of dust appeared behind Rachel's blazer. A white sheriff's SUV approached quickly and stopped at an angle that blocked the road. Deputy Mason Cole stepped out. Cole was 42, heavy through the chest and stomach, with short, sandy hair and a square face weathered by sun and resentment. A pale line crossed his chin from an old bar fight that locals had learned never to mention. He was known for speaking softly before becoming violent, a habit that made his temper more unsettling. Around powerful men, he was obedient. Around everyone else, he was a bully. "What's happening here?" Cole asked. "Civilian interfering with a prisoner transfer," Pike answered. Rachel kept her hands visible. "I witnessed an assault." Cole studied her, then noticed the phone in her pocket. "Give me the phone." "No, that recording involves secured county personnel. It records possible criminal misconduct." Cole stepped closer. "Delete it, and you can drive away." Rachel's expression did not change. "That won't happen." For several seconds, only the broken engine hissed between them. Cole smiled without warmth. "Then I'll need to search your vehicle. You don't have probable cause, and I do not consent." While Cole ordered Pike to restrain her, the younger guard moved toward Rachel's blazer. Cole opened the passenger door himself and leaned inside. His broad back blocked Rachel's view for only a few seconds. It was enough. He slipped a small plastic packet beneath the driver's seat, then reached into the center console and pulled it out as though discovering it. The packet contained prescription painkillers. "Well," Cole said, holding it up, "looks like we found the reason you were so nervous." Rachel stared at him. Her pulse remained steady, but her voice turned cold. "You planted that." Cole grabbed the phone from her pocket and threw it onto the road. His boot came down hard, cracking the screen and crushing the casing. He did not see the small blue cloud icon that had appeared seconds earlier. The dashboard camera had already uploaded part of the recording to Rachel's secured account. Cole twisted her arms behind her and locked handcuffs around her wrists. "Rachel Donovan," he announced, "you are under arrest for possession of controlled substances, obstruction, and interference with a lawful prisoner transfer." As Pike forced Caleb Brooks back into the van, the young prisoner looked through the mesh at Rachel. Fear remained in his eyes, but now there was something else as well. Hope. 37 miles away, Margaret Harper stood on the porch of her small ranch house. She wore a blue cotton dress and held 2 untouched glasses of lemonade. The sun was beginning to sink, but Rachel's blazer had not appeared on the road. Margaret checked her phone again. No missed calls, no message. She looked toward the empty highway and whispered, "Where are you, Rachel?" Back on the mining road, Cole pushed Rachel into the rear of his patrol SUV. Through the dusty window, she watched the prison van turn toward the distant mountains. On its rear doors were 2 faded words, Copper Ridge. Copper Ridge Detention Center rose from the Nevada desert like a concrete shipwreck, surrounded by razor wire, floodlights, and miles of empty brown land. By the time Deputy Mason Cole drove Rachel Donovan through its outer gate, the sun had dropped behind the mountains, leaving the sky bruised purple above the compound. There were no nearby houses, no businesses, and no public road signs identifying the facility. Only a weathered metal board beside the gate carried its name, the letters faded by years of dust and heat. Rachel sat upright in the rear of the patrol SUV, wrists cuffed behind her, quietly studying everything. The cameras mounted over the gate, the blind corner beside the maintenance building, the old watchtower that appeared unmanned, and the transport van from the mining road parked inside the eastern fence. The prisoners had already been removed. Their absence concerned her more than their presence had. Cole led her into the booking area, a narrow room lit by buzzing fluorescent tubes. The walls were gray, the floor stained, and the air smelled of disinfectant, sweat, and hot machinery. 3 inmates in tan uniforms waited along one wall with their ankles chained together. Rachel noticed their faces first, hollow cheeks, cracked lips, eyes fixed on the ground. Then she noticed their boots. Thick, yellow-gray dust coated the leather and filled the seams around the soles. It was not ordinary desert sand. The powder was finer, metallic, and pale enough to resemble crushed stone. One prisoner had matching dust beneath his fingernails. Another had fresh abrasions across both palms, the kind produced by rough tools rather than a fight inside a cell. Rachel had seen similar residue around extraction sites overseas. Someone had taken these men into a mine. A door opened at the far end of the room and Warden Silas Crow entered without hurry. He was 55, tall and narrow-shouldered, with silver hair combed precisely away from a long, angular face. His skin was pale despite years in the desert, and his light brown eyes possessed the flat patience of a man accustomed to watching others suffer while remaining untouched himself. He wore a charcoal suit instead of a correctional uniform, polished black shoes, and a gold watch that looked painfully expensive beside the crumbling walls. Crow spoke to employees with controlled politeness, but it was the politeness of an owner addressing equipment. Years earlier, he had managed a private security company that collapsed after a worker died during an unauthorized overnight operation. Crow had escaped prosecution, and the experience had not humbled him. It had taught him that records mattered only when someone survived to read them. "So this is the woman from the road," he said. Cole placed Rachel's canvas duffel and walnut flag case on the booking desk. "Caught her recording Pike and interfering with the transport. She claims I planted the pills." Crow's gaze sharpened at the word recording. "Where's the device?" "Destroyed." "Uploaded anywhere?" Cole hesitated for half a second. "Not that I saw." Rachel watched Crow register the uncertainty. That was why he had come down personally. A normal prisoner would have been processed by a clerk. Rachel had become a problem the moment she witnessed Caleb Brooks being beaten beside a transport that apparently should not have existed. Crow stepped closer. "Name?" "You have my license. I asked you." "Rachel Donovan." "Occupation?" "Currently private security consulting." Crow glanced at her calloused hands, the scars near her collarbone, and the controlled balance in her stance. "Military?" "Former Navy." Cole laughed. "She wants us to think she's some kind of war hero." Rachel did not answer. Crow mistook silence for evasion. "Open the bag." Rachel looked directly at him. "You need a warrant." "This is a detention facility. Your property is subject to inspection. You have already searched the vehicle illegally. The evidence was planted and I am requesting legal counsel." Crow's mouth tightened. He unzipped the duffel himself. Inside were folded civilian clothes, a medical kit, an old field notebook, and a dark blue Navy dress uniform wrapped carefully in protective cloth. Crow lifted the uniform jacket and examined the ribbons without understanding them. Beneath it, he found several photographs, including one of Rachel standing beside Luke Harper on the deck of a naval vessel. Luke had been 32 when the photograph was taken, a broad, smiling man with reddish-brown hair and an ease Rachel had rarely seen in combat veterans. In the image, one of his hands rested on her shoulder while ocean spray blurred the horizon behind them. Crow opened a smaller case containing military decorations and service documents. The medals were real, but his arrogance made disbelief more comfortable than caution. "These can be bought online," he said. Rachel's expression hardened. "Put them back." Crow ignored her and reached for the walnut case. When he discovered it was locked, he ordered a guard to bring bolt cutters. The brass clasp snapped on the second attempt. Inside rested the triangularly folded American flag meant for Margaret Harper. The photograph of Luke had been placed beneath it, along with a handwritten note from his final deployment. For the first time, Rachel's calm showed a fracture. "Do not touch that flag." Crow heard the warning but interpreted it as vulnerability. He lifted the photograph, glanced at it, and dropped it onto the desk. "Your dead boyfriend?" "My teammate." "Convenient story." At a computer station several feet away sat Officer Owen Price, a 24-year-old correctional clerk with a thin build, sandy blonde hair, and wire-framed glasses that made him look younger than he was. Owen had joined Copper Ridge 6 months earlier because the salary allowed him to support his widowed mother. His father had died in an industrial accident when Owen was 16, leaving him cautious, conflict-averse, and deeply uncomfortable around men who abused authority. He rarely challenged Crow openly, but he noticed details other employees ignored. Owen entered Rachel's information into the intake system. The computer generated her name, date of birth, and alleged charges, but the field-marked inmate registration number remained blank. He tried again. The same error appeared. "Warden," Owen said carefully, "the system isn't assigning her a number." Crow walked over and examined the screen. "Delete the entry." Owen looked up. "Sir?" "You heard me. Without a registration number, there won't be a custody trail. That is not your concern." Owen's fingers hovered over the keyboard. Crow leaned closer and the room seemed to narrow around them. "Delete it." Owen obeyed, but before clearing the screen, he wrote Rachel's name and the time of arrival on the inside cover of this pocket notebook. Crow confiscated Rachel's damaged phone, identification, duffel, uniform, medals, and flag. He refused her request to call an attorney and ordered 2 guards to place her in an unlisted holding cell in the administrative wing. As they led her away, Rachel passed Crow's open office. A large county map covered one wall. Several red lines connected Copper Ridge to an abandoned industrial site in the eastern mountains. A printed label identified it as the Silver Basin Lithium Mine, officially closed 3 years earlier after a structural collapse. Fresh grease pencil markings traced a route from the prison directly to the mine. Rachel looked once at the map, then at the mineral dust on the prisoner's boots. Crow noticed where her attention had settled. Their eyes met. In that instant, both understood the same thing. Rachel had seen more than he could safely allow her to remember. By 9 the next morning, heat already pressed against the walls of Copper Ridge Detention Center like an open furnace. A dark blue sedan rolled through the outer gate and stopped beside the administration building. Lena Ortiz stepped out, carrying a leather briefcase, a yellow legal pad, and the controlled impatience of someone who had spent too many years being underestimated. She was 33, 5 feet 4 inches tall, with a slim build, warm brown skin, and thick black curls pinned loosely behind her head. Her dark eyes were quick, skeptical, and difficult to intimidate. Lena dressed plainly in charcoal trousers, low black heels, and a white blouse beneath a lightweight jacket, but the battered briefcase at her side revealed years of courthouse corridors and underfunded cases. The daughter of a mechanic and a hospital cleaner, she had become a public defender after watching her older brother spend 8 months in county jail because an overworked attorney failed to challenge a mistaken identification. He was eventually cleared, but the experience changed Lena permanently. She had learned that bureaucratic mistakes rarely remained mistakes when powerful people benefited from them. The guard at reception made her wait 40 minutes before notifying Warden Silas Crow. Lena used every minute. She studied the sign-in sheets, memorized the names printed on inmate transport notices, and watched employees avoid eye contact whenever she mentioned Caleb Brooks. Caleb had been assigned to her 6 days earlier after being arrested for driving with an expired registration sticker. He had no violent record, no history of drug use, and no reason to be held without contact. Yet his mother had received no call, no transfer notice, and no explanation from the county. The electronic court file listed him as being held at Copper Ridge, but the facility had denied every request for a confidential legal visit. Crow finally emerged from his office wearing the same tailored charcoal suit Rachel had seen the night before. His silver hair was perfectly combed, and his expression carried the patient irritation of a man interrupted by someone he considered insignificant. "Miss Ortiz," he said, extending no hand. "You've made quite a drive for nothing." "I'm here to see Caleb Brooks." "Mr. Brooks is no longer housed at this facility." "Where was he transferred?" Crow smiled faintly. "North Valley Correctional." "Transfer date?" "I'd have to ask records." "I already called North Valley. They've never received him." The smile remained, but something behind Crow's eyes tightened. "Their system is often delayed." Then show me the transport order, receiving signature, or chain of custody record. Crow gestured toward a row of plastic chairs. Wait here. Lena sat, but she did not stop watching. Through a narrow window beside the reception desk, she could see part of the rear service yard. A blue tarp covered a vehicle parked behind a maintenance shed, but the wind lifted one corner just enough to reveal a faded rear panel and the chrome bumper of an older Chevrolet Blazer. The Nevada dust coating it was fresh, and one of the rear doors bore a scrape that matched the description in a vehicle registration search Lena had performed before leaving town. She stood and moved closer to the glass. The visible portion of the license plate was enough. Using her phone, Lena accessed a state legal database reserved for licensed attorneys. The plate belonged to Rachel Donovan, 36, former United States Navy, current civilian address in Virginia. There was no outstanding warrant, no booking notice, no court appearance, and no record that Rachel had been lawfully detained anywhere in Silver Rock County. Lena photographed the plate through the glass. At the same time, 2 floors below the administration wing, Rachel sat at a metal table with her wrists chained to a ring bolted into the floor. The interrogation room had no clock and no camera that she could see, though she assumed at least one microphone was hidden behind the ventilation grate. Crow entered, carrying Rachel's damaged phone and a printed image of a cloud storage login page. "Your device is destroyed," he said, placing both items on the table. "But the deputy tells me you may have uploaded footage from the road." Rachel leaned back slightly. "Then you already know destroying the phone accomplished nothing." Crow pulled out the chair opposite her. "Give me the password." "No. You are being held on felony drug charges. Cooperation could improve your position. You erased my booking record. I don't have a legal position because officially I am not here." For the first time, Crow's composure faltered. Only slightly, but Rachel noticed. "You misunderstand the situation. I understand it clearly. You have an undocumented prisoner transport, inmates carrying mining residue, a map connecting this facility to a closed lithium operation, and now an illegally detained witness whose vehicle is sitting in your yard." Crow stared at her. "You think anyone knows where you are?" Rachel met his gaze without blinking. "The video left the phone before Cole broke it. If I fail to check in, people will start looking. When they do, they won't stop with me." Crow stood abruptly. "You are not in a position to threaten anyone." That wasn't a threat. It was a timeline. Upstairs, Lena was finally allowed into a cramped records room. Owen Price sat behind the computer terminal, shoulders slightly hunched, his sandy blonde hair damp with sweat despite the air conditioning. Crow stood near the door while Owen searched the database for Caleb's name. The screen showed a transfer notation but no destination code, no authorization signature, and no receiving officer. "There," Crow said. "Transferred." "That entry proves nothing," Lena replied. "Open the attached order." Owen clicked the field. An error message appeared. Lena placed a handwritten list on the desk. It contained names collected from families, court dockets, and unanswered public record requests. These 11 people were also supposedly transferred from Copper Ridge during the last 4 months. None arrived at the facilities listed in their court files. Their families were never notified. Crow glanced at the names. Caleb Brooks was 3rd on the list. Owen recognized several others. He had processed them himself, then watched their registration numbers disappear days later. "Your information is incomplete," Crow said. "Then complete it," Lena answered. "Show me one valid transfer document." Crow ordered the meeting ended. As Lena was escorted back toward reception, she passed the window overlooking the service yard and deliberately looked again at Rachel's Blazer. Crow noticed. That evening, Owen carried a mop bucket down the administrative corridor. No guard questioned him because cleaning supplies were part of his nightly duties. When he reached Rachel's unlisted cell, he paused only long enough to slide a sealed bottle of water and a wrapped sandwich through the lower food slot. Rachel remained seated against the wall. "Why are you helping me?" Owen kept his eyes on the corridor. "Because your name isn't in the system. That should make helping me more dangerous." "It does." Before leaving, he whispered, "A lawyer came looking for Caleb Brooks." Rachel remembered the wounded young man on the mining road and the two words he had forced through split lips. Copper Ridge. Outside the prison, Lena sat in her sedan and reviewed the photograph of Rachel's license plate beside the list of 11 missing inmates. She now knew Caleb had not simply vanished. Someone at Copper Ridge was removing people from the record, and Rachel Donovan had become the newest name they were trying to erase. By midnight, Warden Silas Crow had convinced himself that Rachel Donovan was bluffing. No federal agents had appeared at the gate, no lawyer had returned with a warrant, and no outside authority had called demanding answers. To Crow, the silence meant the video had never reached the cloud. It also meant Rachel could still be frightened into surrendering her password before anyone noticed she was missing. He entered her cell with Mason Cole and two unnamed correctional officers, both large men in dark uniforms who kept their faces expressionless and followed orders without asking questions. Rachel had not slept. She sat against the concrete wall with her knees raised, conserving energy and listening to the facility's nighttime rhythms. When Crow ordered her to stand, she rose slowly, her wrists already extended for the restraints. "Last opportunity," he said. "Give me the password and this ends." Rachel looked at him with steady gray eyes. "The evidence is already outside your control." Crow's mouth tightened. He signaled Cole, who fastened the cuffs painfully behind her back. "Then perhaps fear will improve your memory." They marched Rachel through the administrative wing, down a service stairwell and into a lower section of Copper Ridge that did not appear on any public blueprint. The temperature dropped with every level. Fluorescent lights gave way to weak yellow bulbs protected by wire cages. Rust streaked the walls and the air smelled of stagnant water, animal waste, and burned insulation. Rachel counted 3 locked doors, 2 intersections, and approximately 47 descending steps before the corridor opened into an abandoned maintenance tunnel beneath the prison. Old pipes ran along the ceiling, sweating condensation onto the cracked floor. At the far end stood 2 iron kennels covered with stained canvas. Something moved behind them. Chains scraped across concrete, followed by a low, uneven growl. Crow stopped several feet from the cages. "You spent time in the Navy," he said. "Perhaps you understand the importance of obedience." One of the officers pulled the canvas away. The first dog was Ranger, a male Belgian Malinois of nearly 80 pounds, with a dark fawn coat, a black mask, and a muscular frame reduced by hunger. He should have looked athletic and alert, but his ribs showed beneath his fur and patches of hair were missing from his shoulders. His amber eyes darted between the men, never resting, and a leather collar had rubbed the skin around his neck raw. Ranger's aggression was explosive, but Rachel recognized the panic beneath it. He lunged whenever anyone approached because pain had taught him that distance was his only safety. The second dog, Echo, was a slightly smaller female Belgian Malinois with a sable coat, one torn ear, and intelligent brown eyes clouded by exhaustion. Unlike Ranger, she remained near the back of her kennel, growling without wasting energy. A right hind leg trembled, and a length of thin wire had wrapped around the lower joint, cutting through fur and into swollen flesh. Dried blood darkened the concrete beneath her paw. A black electric baton hung from a hook beside the cages. Rachel looked at Crow. "You did this to them." "They are security assets," he replied. "They require strong correction." "They're starving and injured." Crow smiled. "Then they should be highly motivated." He explained the story he intended to tell afterward. Rachel would supposedly attack an officer, escape her restraints, and enter a restricted tunnel. The K9s would be released to stop her. Any injuries, or her death, would be recorded as the lawful result of an attempted escape. Cole unlocked Rachel's cuffs but kept his hand near his pistol. "Run if you want," he said. "They enjoy the chase." Rachel rolled her shoulders once, restoring circulation to her hands. She did not move toward the exit. She did not plead. She simply turned to face Ranger's cage. Crow ordered the kennel opened. The iron door lifted, and Ranger launched forward with terrifying speed. His claws struck sparks from the floor as he crossed the tunnel. Rachel remained where she was, standing sideways rather than squarely confronting him. Her arms stayed low, her gaze focused on his shoulders instead of challenging his eyes. Ranger leaped toward her chest. "Ranger, halt!" Her voice filled the tunnel with a sharp authority that did not resemble Crow's shouting. Ranger hesitated in mid-stride, landing less than 3 feet away. His teeth remained exposed, saliva hanging from his jaws, but the certainty in Rachel's tone had interrupted the fear-driven pattern controlling him. "Easy," she said, lowering her body slightly. "Nobody is going to hurt you." Ranger circled her, growling. Rachel turned slowly with him but never retreated. She noticed the flinch whenever Cole shifted his weight near the electric baton. The dog was not hunting her. He was searching for the next source of pain. Crow's amusement vanished. "Attack!" he shouted. "Get her!" Ranger's ears flattened, but he looked toward Rachel instead of obeying Crow. Rachel extended one open hand, palm down. "Down!" For several seconds, Ranger trembled between conditioning and instinct. Then his front legs bent, his chest lowered to the floor. The growl faded into a strained whine. Crow stared at him in disbelief. Before he could respond, Cole released Echo. The injured female stepped from the kennel cautiously, dragging her hind leg. She bared her teeth when Rachel moved toward her, but Rachel immediately stopped and sat on the concrete to appear smaller. "You don't have to trust me," she whispered. "Just don't move." Echo's growl continued as Rachel examined the wire from a distance. She removed her canvas overshirt, tore one sleeve into several strips, and waited until Echo allowed her closer. Ranger remained between Rachel and the men, watching Crow with rigid attention. When Rachel finally touched Echo's leg, the dog snapped once in warning but did not bite. Rachel loosened the wire carefully, pulled it free, and wrapped the injured joint with the cleanest section of cloth. Echo released a long breath and lowered herself beside Rachel, resting her muzzle against the floor near Rachel's knee. Above the tunnel, Owen Price watched the security feed from the overnight control room. His face had gone pale as he saw the kennels open and understood what Crow intended. A live camera showed Rachel kneeling beside Echo while Ranger stood protectively in front of her. Owen inserted a small flash drive into the console and copied the full recording. His hands shook, but he did not stop until the progress bar reached 100%. Seconds later, Crow's voice crackled through the radio, ordering every camera file from the tunnel erased. Owen removed the drive and slipped it inside his sock before deleting the visible copy. Down below, Crow backed toward the exit as Ranger turned to face him. Rachel placed one hand gently on the dog's shoulder. "Stay," she commanded. Ranger obeyed. Crow had brought Rachel into the tunnel to prove she was powerless. Instead, beneath the prison, the two animals he had broken had recognized the one person who did not intend to control them through pain. For several minutes after Crow retreated from the tunnel, Rachel remained still beside the two Belgian Malinois. Ranger stood between her and the locked exit, his ears fixed on the fading footsteps beyond the steel door. Echo lay close to Rachel's knee, her injured hind leg wrapped in torn canvas. The prison had become quiet above them, but beneath that silence, Rachel detected another sound, a faint mechanical vibration traveling through the concrete floor. It came in regular pulses, followed by a distant metallic impact. Machinery. Somewhere beyond the tunnel walls, heavy equipment was still operating long after midnight. Ranger heard it too. He lifted his head, sniffed the air, and moved toward the far end of the passage. Rachel followed, keeping one hand near Echo so the injured dog would not attempt to move too quickly. At the final support column, Ranger pressed his nose against a narrow crack hidden behind rusted pipes. The gap was barely wide enough for a hand, but cold air flowed through it, carrying mineral dust, diesel fumes, and the unmistakable smell of exhausted human bodies. Rachel removed a loose section of corroded metal and widened the opening. Behind it was an older service passage cut directly into the rock. The walls were reinforced with decaying timber, and faded warning signs identified the route as part of the Silver Basin lithium mine. According to the map in Crow's office, the mine had been closed 3 years earlier after a structural collapse. Yet electric cables ran along the floor, warm from active current, and fresh boot prints covered the dust. Rachel slipped through the opening with Ranger. Echo followed more slowly, refusing to remain behind despite her injury. The passage descended gradually until the sound of machinery grew louder. Rachel moved without speaking, using hand signals Ranger seemed to understand instinctively. After nearly 200 yards, they reached a steel ventilation grate overlooking a cavernous excavation chamber illuminated by industrial floodlights. Below them, more than 20 prisoners worked beneath armed supervision. Some pushed carts filled with pale crushed rock. Others operated drills without masks, helmets, or protective clothing. Their tan uniforms were dark with sweat, and metal chains connected several men at the ankles. The guards carried batons and shotguns, but none wore official identification. Rachel immediately understood why the prisoners' boots had been covered in mineral residue. Crow was removing selected inmates from the detention system, transferring them into a hidden labor force, and using the abandoned mine to generate private profit. Men who no longer existed on paper could be injured, exploited, or killed without creating an official incident. Near a conveyor belt, Rachel saw Caleb Brooks. The young prisoner from the mining road looked worse than he had the previous day. His curly black hair was coated with dust, one eye was swollen, and he held his left arm tight against his ribs. A guard ordered him to lift a heavy crate. Caleb tried, but his knees buckled. An older inmate beside him caught the crate before it crushed his foot. The man was in his late 50s, lean and gray-bearded, with the stooped posture of someone who had spent years doing physical labor. His face was deeply lined, but he still shared the little water remaining in his cup with Caleb. Nearby, another prisoner coughed violently into his sleeve, leaving a dark stain on the fabric. No medical staff were present. Rachel wanted to move immediately, but experience overruled emotion. She had no weapon, no communications, and 2 dogs, one injured, under her protection. A reckless rescue attempt could cause every prisoner below to be shot. She studied the chamber instead, counting guards, exits, cameras, generators, and ventilation shafts. Caleb glanced upward once, perhaps sensing movement, but the darkness concealed her. Rachel placed 2 fingers against the grate, silently promising that she had seen him and would not forget. Several miles away, Owen Price parked his aging compact car beneath the harsh lights of an all-night gas station outside Silver Rock. His hands remained tight on the steering wheel until Lena Ortiz's sedan arrived. Lena stepped out cautiously, her black curls loose around her shoulders after a long day, and approached with her phone ready to record. Owen looked even younger outside his uniform. At 24, he was thin, pale, and visibly frightened, but fear had finally stopped controlling him. He handed Lena the flash drive containing the tunnel footage and a folded list copied from internal records. It included Caleb Brooks and 11 other prisoners whose registration numbers had disappeared after supposed transfers. "Why are you doing this?" Lena asked. Owen stared toward the dark mountains. "My father worked at Silver Basin. He was a maintenance electrician, quiet, patient, the kind of man who repaired neighbors' appliances without charging them. The company said he died in the collapse 3 years ago." Owen swallowed. Crow was the security contractor responsible for the site that night. My mother was told the body couldn't be recovered. I took the job at Copper Ridge because I wanted access to the records. Then I saw inmates being moved after midnight. Lena inserted the drive into her laptop and watched Crow release Ranger toward Rachel. Her expression hardened as the video continued, showing Rachel calming both dogs and treating Echo's wound. She copied the files into 3 separate encrypted folders, then transmitted them with the missing prisoner list to the FBI field office in Las Vegas and the federal agency responsible for investigating private detention facilities. She included Rachel's vehicle registration, Caleb's court documents, and a warning that lives could be in immediate danger. At that same hour, Margaret Harper sat alone at her kitchen table, unable to sleep. Rachel had once given her emergency access to a secured cloud folder containing photographs and documents connected to Luke. Margaret had never opened it before. Now, worried by Rachel's silence, she entered the password written inside an old Christmas card. A newly uploaded dashboard camera file appeared at the top of the account. Margaret pressed play. She watched a prison guard strike Caleb beside the broken transport van. She heard him whisper, "Copper Ridge." Then Mason Cole entered the frame and demanded Rachel's phone. Margaret's gentle face changed. Grief had made her patient, but it had never made her weak. She downloaded the video, saved 2 copies, and reached for the telephone. Back beneath Copper Ridge, Rachel watched the prisoners labor through the night while Ranger stood silently at her side. Crow believed he had buried his secret beneath stone, erased names, and frightened every witness into obedience. He did not yet know that 3 separate trails of evidence had just escaped his control. Silas Crow discovered Owen Price's betrayal shortly before dawn. The tunnel recording had been erased from the main security system, exactly as ordered, but the access logs showed that someone had copied the file first. Only 3 employees had entered the control room that night, and Owen was the only one whose keycard had remained active during the transfer. Crow stood behind the young clerk's empty desk, staring at the digital record until anger replaced panic. He understood that Owen had not merely disobeyed him, he had carried evidence beyond Copper Ridge's walls. Crow immediately ordered every undocumented prisoner moved out of the Silver Basin mine before sunrise. He instructed 2 loyal guards to soak the records room with diesel fuel, destroy the surveillance servers, and burn every transfer ledger connecting the prison to the mine. At the private airstrip behind the maintenance yard, a single-engine Cessna waited beneath a canvas shelter. Crow had purchased it through a shell company and kept enough cash, forged documents, and fuel aboard to reach Mexico. He intended to leave the moment the evidence disappeared. Mason Cole found Lena Ortiz at the edge of Silver Rock before she could drive onto the state highway. He blocked her sedan with his patrol vehicle, dragged her out at gunpoint, and confiscated her phone and laptop. Lena's small frame made her appear physically vulnerable beside the heavy deputy, but she remained controlled, studying his movements and memorizing every word. Cole discovered that the laptop's files had already been transmitted. Furious, he struck the side of the car and demanded to know where Owen was hiding. Lena refused to answer. Cole bound her wrists with plastic restraints and transported her through a service entrance into the mine. Crow placed her in an equipment chamber near the underground loading platform where 2 armed guards watched her beneath flickering industrial lights. He planned to use Lena as bait. Owen cared about the missing prisoners, but Crow believed guilt would force him to return if an innocent woman was threatened because of his actions. Beneath the prison, Rachel noticed the first signs of the cover-up before she saw them. Echo stopped beside a ventilation junction and lifted her injured leg, her nose working rapidly. The female Malinois gave a low, warning growl and turned toward a narrow drainage channel. Rachel smelled it seconds later. Diesel fuel, strong and fresh, flowing through the underground air system. Someone was preparing a fire. In the mine chamber below, guards began unchaining prisoners and forcing them toward cargo trucks parked inside a reinforced loading bay. Rachel knew that once the men were moved into the desert, they might never be found. Then the lights failed. The entire mine dropped into darkness as the generators above suddenly lost power. Machinery slowed into silence, guards shouted conflicting orders, and prisoners stumbled against one another. Rachel pulled the ventilation grate free and descended into the chamber with Ranger and Echo. Ranger moved ahead without barking, using scent and sound to locate the nearest guard. Rachel struck the man's wrist, caught his falling baton, and lowered him unconscious without firing his shotgun. Echo blocked a second guard long enough for Rachel to disarm him. Within seconds, Caleb Brooks recognized her voice. "The woman from the road," he whispered. Rachel found Caleb beside the silent conveyor system. He was weak from dehydration, and his ribs were badly bruised, but his mind remained sharp. Before his arrest, Caleb had worked as an industrial electrician, a profession he had learned from his uncle after leaving community college. He was naturally curious, patient with machinery, and more courageous than his thin, exhausted appearance suggested. Rachel handed him the guard's keys and ordered him to free the others. Together, they opened the chains and moved more than 20 prisoners away from the loading bay. Some wanted to seize weapons and attack the guards above, but Rachel stopped them. "Crow wants confusion," she said. "If you rush the prison, innocent officers and prisoners will die." She directed them toward an unused ventilation route she had identified earlier, a passage wide enough to reach an emergency surface hatch beyond the eastern fence. The main fans were dead, however, and smoke had begun entering the tunnels. Caleb examined the electrical panel, stripped 2 wires with a broken piece of metal, and bypassed the damaged control circuit. The ventilation motors coughed, sparked, and finally restarted, drawing smoke away from the escape route. The prisoners began moving in pairs, supporting the injured between them. Above ground, Owen had returned through an employee entrance after watching Crow's men seize Lena. Instead of hiding, he entered the central control room and locked the door behind him. His face was pale, but his hands no longer shook. He activated the facility-wide public address system. "This is Officer Owen Price," he announced, his voice echoing through every cell block, office, and guard station. "Warden Crow has been operating an illegal labor camp beneath Copper Ridge. Prisoners have been removed from the system, abused, and forced to work inside Silver Basin Mine. Federal authorities have the evidence. Any officer who continues following Crow's orders will be participating in kidnapping and attempted murder. Put down your weapons, unlock the cell blocks, and protect the inmates." Several guards loyal to Crow tried to break into the control room, but others hesitated. One officer lowered his shotgun. Then another removed his keyring and began opening doors. Crow's authority, built entirely on fear and silence, started collapsing from within. In the mine, Rachel counted the prisoners as they entered the ventilation passage. Caleb remained behind until the last injured man was safely inside. Echo suddenly turned away from the escape route and stared toward the loading platform, where Lena's briefcase lay beside an overturned chair. Rachel found a broken plastic restraint and one of Lena's shoes near a trail leading back toward the prison. Crow had taken her deeper into the facility. Rachel ordered Caleb to guide the prisoners to the surface and not turn back under any circumstances. Caleb wanted to help, but Rachel placed the captured radio in his hand. "Your job is to get them out and tell the authorities everything." Ranger stood at Rachel's right side while Echo, limping but determined, remained at her left. Smoke thickened near the ceiling, and distant gunshots echoed through the prison above. Rachel looked once toward the passage carrying the prisoners to freedom, then turned toward the dark corridor where Lena had been taken. "Find her," she whispered. Both dogs lowered their noses and moved forward. Ranger followed Lena's scent through the smoke-filled service corridor, while Echo moved beside Rachel with a determined limp. The 2 Belgian Malinois led her past the burning records wing and toward a steel stairwell marked Roof Access. Through the walls came the thunder of engines, shouted commands, and the heavy chopping of helicopter rotors. The evidence sent by Lena, Owen, and Margaret Harper had finally reached the right people. Beyond the perimeter fence, armored FBI vehicles, Nevada State Police cruisers, ambulances, and fire engines surrounded Copper Ridge beneath flashing red and blue lights. Flood lamps turned the desert night white. Special Agent Marcus Hale commanded the federal operation. Hale was 46, tall and lean, with close-cropped black hair, a narrow scar over his right eyebrow, and the steady voice of a man who had learned never to let urgency become panic. A former Army infantry officer, he had joined the FBI after losing a civilian interpreter during an overseas evacuation, an experience that made hostage safety more important to him than dramatic arrests. Wearing dark, tactical armor over a gray uniform, he directed agents toward the prison entrances while rescue teams received the prisoners emerging from the eastern ventilation hatch. Caleb Brooks was among the first to reach them. Barely able to stand, he handed Rachel's captured radio to Hale and reported that Crow had taken Lena toward the roof while Mason Cole was heading for the private airstrip. Hale divided his teams immediately. State police sealed the runway. FBI agents entered the main building. Paramedics moved toward the freed prisoners with stretchers, oxygen masks, and water. Inside the prison, Owen Price unlocked the control room door and stepped into the central corridor with both hands raised. He carried a ring of master keys, the hidden flash drive, printed access logs, and a portable hard drive containing copies of internal surveillance footage. Several federal agents ordered him to the floor until Hale arrived. "My name is Owen Price," he said, kneeling willingly. "I copied the K9 tunnel video. I have the deleted prisoner records, camera logs, transport schedules, and the names of the guards Crow paid." Hale took the evidence bag but did not promise Owen anything. "You will be detained, interviewed, and treated according to your cooperation." "I understand." Behind Owen, 4 correctional officers laid down their weapons. They were exhausted men who had obeyed Crow out of fear of losing their jobs or being framed themselves. One admitted helping falsify transport logs. Another revealed where Crow stored payment ledgers and ammunition. All agreed to testify once federal agents separated them from the Warden's loyal enforcers. On the roof, Silas Crow dragged Lena toward the edge beside the helicopter landing marker. One arm locked around her neck while his other hand pressed a pistol against her ribs. The desert wind whipped his silver hair loose from its careful style, stripping away the polished appearance that had once made him seem untouchable. Below, agents shouted through loudspeakers for him to release the hostage. "You caused this," Crow hissed into Lena's ear. "No," Lena replied through shallow breaths. "You did." At the rear of the compound, Mason Cole ran toward the airstrip, carrying a metal cash box under one arm and a thick leather ledger beneath the other. His face was slick with sweat, and his heavy body labored beneath the weight. A pistol remained clenched in his right hand. The Cessna stood only 50 yards away, its propeller beginning to turn after a bribed mechanic started the engine. Rachel emerged from a maintenance store between the roof stairwell and the runway. She saw Cole first, then heard Lena's voice above her. Splitting her attention between 2 armed men would ordinarily have been impossible. Ranger and Echo made it possible. Rachel pointed toward Cole. "Echo, block!" Echo accelerated despite her injured leg, cutting across the runway rather than charging directly at him. She positioned herself between Cole and the plane, barking with such force that he stumbled backward. Cole raised his pistol, but Echo shifted unpredictably, never giving him a clear shot. "Get away from me!" he shouted. Echo lunged forward without biting. Cole panicked, dropped the ledger, and fired into the ground. The recoil and his unbalanced stance sent the pistol spinning from his hand. State troopers rushed from behind the hangar, forced him face down onto the runway, and secured his wrists. The cash box burst open when it struck the pavement, scattering bundles of currency beneath the plane's landing lights. Rachel and Ranger continued up the roof stairwell. The door opened onto violent wind and rotating beams of light. Crow turned Lena toward Rachel, using her body as a shield. "Stay back!" he shouted. "I'll kill her!" Rachel stopped 10 yards away. Ranger remained close to her left leg, silent and focused. "You still have a choice, Crow. You think I'm going to prison because of animals and criminals? You're going because you believed powerless people didn't count." Crow began dragging Lena toward the roof's edge. Rachel noticed his pistol hand tightening and his attention shifting toward the tactical team approaching from the opposite stairwell. He was preparing to fire at Lena before turning the weapon on himself or the agents. Rachel lowered 2 fingers. Ranger watched the signal. Crow moved the gun toward Lena's chest. "Ranger, hold!" The Malinois crossed the distance in seconds. He did not attack Crow's throat or tear into his body. Trained by Rachel's calm direction rather than Crow's cruelty, Ranger clamped onto the Warden's gun arm and pulled it away from Lena. The pistol discharged harmlessly into the night. Crow screamed, released Lena, and fell to one knee. Rachel caught Lena before she hit the concrete and pulled her clear. FBI agents surrounded Crow, removed the weapon, and forced him onto his stomach. At Rachel's command, Ranger released immediately and returned to her side. Crow's sleeve was torn and his forearm bruised, but the dog had shown extraordinary control. Minutes later, agents marched Crow and Cole into the central yard in handcuffs. The rescued prisoners watched from behind medical barricades as the 2 men who had terrorized them were placed into separate federal vehicles. Some remained silent. Others wept. Caleb stood with an oxygen tube beneath his nose and watched until the doors closed. A rescue helicopter landed inside the recreation yard. Its pilot, Captain Nora Bennett, was a 40-year-old Nevada National Guard officer with short auburn hair and a composed, practical manner developed through years of mountain rescues. Her crew loaded the most seriously injured prisoners aboard, including men suffering from fractures, dehydration, and severe respiratory distress. The helicopter lifted into the night, carrying them toward a hospital in Las Vegas. Lena stood wrapped in a paramedic's blanket beside Rachel. Echo rested against one of Rachel's boots, while Ranger sat alert on the other side. "They tried to turn those dogs into weapons," Lena said. Rachel looked toward Crow's departing vehicle. "They chose what they wanted to be." For the first time since entering Silver Rock County, the gates of Copper Ridge stood open, not to bring prisoners inside, but to carry its victims toward freedom. The federal investigation into Copper Ridge lasted 11 months, but the truth began surfacing within days of the raid. Agents recovered burned transport logs, hidden payroll accounts, mineral contracts, security footage, and the remains of falsified medical reports. Beneath the Silver Basin mine, forensic teams discovered sealed shafts containing evidence of prisoners who had died from untreated injuries, toxic exposure, and structural collapses. Silas Crow had operated the prison as a private kingdom, selling lithium through shell companies while removing vulnerable inmates from official records. Mason Cole had protected the operation by fabricating arrests, planting evidence, threatening families, and intercepting anyone who came too close. The testimony of Owen Price, Lena Ortiz, Caleb Brooks, and the surviving prisoners tied every document together. Crow was convicted of forced labor, kidnapping, conspiracy, embezzlement, civil rights violations, and responsibility for multiple deaths. He received life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Cole was convicted of planting narcotics, unlawful detention, attempted murder, and conspiracy. When the judge pronounced the sentences, neither man looked powerful anymore. They looked small beneath the weight of the names they had tried to erase. Every surviving prisoner held illegally at Copper Ridge was formally cleared. Their records were corrected, their families notified, and a federal compensation fund was established using money seized from Crow's hidden accounts. Some settlements could never replace the years stolen from them, but the public acknowledgement mattered. For the first time, the victims were addressed by their names rather than inmate numbers. Lena Ortiz stood beside many of them during the hearings. The petite attorney with dark curls and an unshakable voice had become nationally known, yet she refused lucrative offers from large firms. Instead, she founded the Copper Ridge Justice Project, a non-profit organization providing legal assistance to prisoners, former inmates, and families whose complaints had been ignored. Lena remained direct and relentless, but the case softened something in her. She learned that justice was not only about proving who had caused harm, it was also about helping survivors build lives after the courtroom emptied. Owen received immunity from prosecution because of his cooperation and the evidence he had preserved. During the trial, he admitted that fear had kept him silent longer than it should have. He did not ask to be praised. He simply told the jury that courage had begun for him when remaining quiet became more painful than speaking. His testimony exposed the internal structure of Crow's operation and helped identify employees who had participated willingly. It also cleared several guards who had been threatened into obedience and later assisted during the raid. Owen returned to his mother after the trial, carrying the truth about his father's death. Records recovered from Silver Basin proved that Crow's former security company had ignored electrical warnings before the fatal collapse. Owen finally understood that his father had not died because of bad luck. He had died because powerful men believed safety was less valuable than profit. Rachel Donovan rarely attended the hearings. She testified once, clearly and without drama, then spent most of the following months at a veterinary rehabilitation facility outside Reno. Ranger recovered first. With proper food, patient handling, and freedom from electric punishment, the lean Belgian Malinois became confident and attentive. Echo required surgery on her damaged leg, followed by months of physical therapy. Her torn ear remained uneven, and she always walked with a slight hitch when tired, but the fear gradually left her brown eyes. Both dogs refused to settle when Rachel was absent. When officials debated where they should be placed, Rachel submitted the adoption applications herself. No one objected. Ranger and Echo had been listed as security equipment under Crow's records. They left federal custody as living animals with names, medical histories, and a permanent home. When Echo was strong enough to travel, Rachel drove her old Chevrolet Blazer to Margaret Harper's ranch. Ranger sat upright in the rear seat while Echo rested beside him on a thick blanket. Margaret was waiting on the porch in a blue dress, her silver hair moving gently in the afternoon wind. She looked smaller than Rachel remembered, but grief had not weakened her dignified posture. Rachel carried the repaired walnut case with both hands. Inside rested the folded flag, Luke's photograph, and the note Crow had once treated as meaningless. "I should have brought this years ago," Rachel said. Margaret opened the case but looked at Rachel instead of the flag. "You came when you were ready." Rachel's controlled expression finally broke. She confessed that she had replayed Luke's final mission for years, believing that a different decision might have brought him home. Margaret stepped forward and wrapped her arms around the taller woman. "My son made his own choice," she whispered. "He saved lives because that was who he was. He would never want his death to become your prison." Ranger approached and pressed his head against Rachel's hand. Echo leaned gently against Margaret's knee. Margaret smiled through her tears. "Perhaps Luke sent them to find you, not because they needed a warrior, but because you needed a reason to keep coming home." 1 year later, the Harper Ridge Sanctuary opened on 70 acres overlooking the Nevada foothills. The center rehabilitated abandoned military and police dogs while pairing suitable animals with veterans suffering from trauma, isolation, and loss. Rachel directed training with the same discipline she had once carried into combat, but her methods relied on patience rather than dominance. Ranger and Echo became the sanctuary's first therapy dogs, proving that animals once shaped by cruelty could choose gentleness when given safety. Caleb Brooks, now healthier and reunited with his 8-year-old daughter, joined the sanctuary as its electrical and maintenance technician. His daughter often followed him through the workshops, carrying a plastic toolbox and laughing whenever Ranger stole one of her gloves. Owen became the lead kennel caretaker, approaching every frightened new arrival with the quiet patience he wished someone had shown his younger self. Lena visited regularly, sometimes bringing clients who needed a safe place to recover while their legal cases continued. She and Rachel developed a lasting friendship built not on comfortable words, but on the shared promise that no person or animal under their protection would disappear unheard again. On the sanctuary's first anniversary, Rachel climbed the eastern hill before dawn. Ranger walked at her right side, Echo moved at her left, her uneven steps steady against the rocky ground. Below them, lights glowed inside the kennels and cabins where rescued dogs and wounded veterans slept in safety. As the sun rose, gold spread across the desert that had once hidden Copper Ridge's crimes. Rachel rested one hand on each dog. Neither Ranger nor Echo had been born vicious. They had simply survived what had been done to them. In the end, they had not chosen the strongest person in the tunnel. They had chosen the one who offered them mercy. Together, the woman and the 2 dogs watched the darkness retreat, knowing that freedom was more than an open gate. It was the chance to become something greater than the pain left behind. Sometimes God does not remove us from the darkness immediately. Instead, He sends us the strength, the courage, and even the right companions to help us walk through it. Rachel believed she was rescuing Ranger and Echo, but perhaps God placed those 2 wounded dogs in her path so they could rescue her heart as well. Their story reminds us that neither cruelty nor suffering gets the final word. With faith, mercy, and a second chance, even the deepest wounds can become the beginning of something beautiful. Do you believe God sometimes sends animals into our lives for a special purpose? If you do, write Amen in the comments and tell us about an animal that changed your life. Please like this video and subscribe to the channel so you do not miss the next powerful stories about loyalty, courage, faith, and second chances.